So today we're reviewing The Dead Zone by Stephen King. This is my series of book reviews where I review all Stephen King novels in order of publication from beginning to end. Now we have fallen to The Dead Zone with Stephen King. Just by way of introduction, I am Brian Lee Durfee, the author of The Forgetting Moon, published by Simon & Schuster Saga Press, amongst other novels. And this is my video review blog where I review books, movies, music, other things. I give writing advice, different things like that. Today we're going to talk about The Dead Zone. This is a book that I have not read since high school. This is the second time I've read it. The fact of the matter is, I did not remember a single thing about this book. And so I was going into it almost fresh. It was like a brand new story for me. So it was kind of a treat because a lot of the Stephen King books I've read and reread a lot. And so this was a treat to go back into this fresh without even remembering a single plot point or a single character or anything like that. Now, as you know, if you followed my reviews, you know that I am not only reviewing the book, but I'm also reviewing the audible.com version of the book. I am reading along to the audible.com narration. This narration for The Dead Zone was done by the actor James Franco. Everybody knows James Franco. He did a magnificent job. Probably, so far, one of the best jobs I've seen handled by the narrators and the voice actors. James Franco just knocks it out of the park with this. Fantastic. And part of that was due to the fact that I was unfamiliar with the story, having not read it in 30 years or more. And so I was enjoying it as I was going along. Let's... A couple things about this book that I think are unique. I do believe Castle Rock, Maine, which is the place where most of Stephen King's novels are set, was first introduced in this book, The Dead Zone. I could be wrong. I believe it's so. In the comments, please correct me if I'm wrong. Another thing that I noticed was the main character was named John Smith or Johnny Smith. Now, and then this book, oddly enough, reminded me a lot of Robert Heinlein's Stranger in a Strange Land. And I'm wondering if this naming the main character John Smith was an homage to that book with Valentine Smith. If I remember correctly, that was the name that was in the Stranger in a Strange Land of the main character, because this book sort of is a Stranger in a Strange Land type book. The main plot, let's just get to the main plot before I critique much else. The main plot is that John Smith, he's in a coma. He has a brief love affair, it's not really a love affair, but he kind of is falling in love with this girl, and he takes a taxi home from a date one night, and he's in a crash. He ends up in a coma for 5 years. When he wakes up from the coma, he is... got some supernatural powers about him. He's kind of clairvoyant. He can see into the future. Kind of like a lot of other Stephen King's books. We know we've got characters like that in The Stand. Of course, we've got characters like that in The Shining. Even Carrie had that. You know, King in his early novels is really playing with this idea of people having supernatural powers and being able to see into the future and things like that. The trick with this book is, though, John Smith, to see into the future, he actually has to have physical contact with the person. He actually has to touch them, shake their hand, and he can see into their future just like that. But he can't see everything. One of the things is the reason this book is titled as it is because he can see most everything. He just can't see everything because there are dead zones within his sort of supernatural power where parts of people's futures are kind of left vague or left blank or left black, and he calls them the dead zones. Now, that's where the book got its name. I think it's a great name for a book. It's one of my favorite names for Stephen King book. If not, this might not be my favorite novel I've ever read of Stephen King, but I think it's a great name for a book. Now, let's talk about some of the things I liked and disliked about the book. That's the basic premise of the story. John Smith, he wakes up from a coma. He can see into the future. He can touch people and see what they've done in their past, their future, all this stuff. He knows their darkest secrets of their heart, except for the occasional dead zone, and he can't really tell. Now, he starts. People start figuring this out about him because he starts talking about things, and people are like, "Hey, how did you know that?" And then the police get a wind of what he's doing, and he starts to solve some murders using this power of his. And then it kind of this throws the suspicion on him, like maybe, well, is he kind of the murderer? It's kind of the similar theme to Salem's Lot, where our main character Ben Mears moved into town recently and murder started happening and people kind of started to suspect him of being the murderer. Same thing happens here in the Dead Zone. John Smith, he wakes up from the coma. He can see into people's darkest hearts and their futures and pasts, and he can tell whether they've committed murders and stuff like that. But then the suspicion is thrown onto him too. So it's kind of as I'm rereading these books from publication order from start to end, these first handful of books that Stephen King's written, I've noticed have a lot of similar themes that kind of he keeps working a lot of similar elements into his story. And I think that that's probably because he's a bestseller and he wasn't wanting to stray too far away from that formula, and he was kind of keeping on board with that a little bit. And maybe his publisher said, hey, give us some more of the Carrie supernatural stuff, However, this one is a little bit different because it's not a horror novel. It's not a horror novel at all. It's very much kind of like a literary thriller, kind of like a psychological slow burn, psychological kind of twisty turny story. There's no gore, aside from he opens the book with one of the main evil people kicking a dog to death. So if you don't like dogs, if you don't like animals being hurt in your books, this one opens up with a pretty gruesome scene of a dog being killed. And Dean Koontz has said in his books he can kill men, women, children, babies, whatever, but as soon as he kills an animal, or especially a dog, he loses like tens of thousands of readers. So I don't know if you're sensitive to that kind of thing. Just know that there's dog death at the beginning. However, beyond that, there's no gore. There's no real horror moments. There's no real you gotcha moments or twists and turns where it's just like you're grossed out or you're really scared to go to sleep at night or scared of things under the bed. No, this is more of a psychological thriller, more of a literary piece of fiction for King, I do believe. Now, the one of the things that I enjoyed about this story was the love interest at the beginning. I thought it was great. I thought he really set up a nice first date for these people, and you could tell that they really liked each other. And then he goes into the coma, and then life moves on for the girl, and it's really kind of heartbreaking in that way, but it's really interesting. One of the things that really pulled me into the story and really made me enjoy it, and like I said, I read this when I was very young. I didn't remember anything about it, so it was like reading a brand new Stephen King novel for me. So it was very refreshing, very enjoyable, and James Franco did a great job of narrating it. One of the things that I did notice, which took me out of the story just briefly, was there was a Jimmy Carter, the president of the United States in the 70s, plays a cameo in this book. He plays himself in this book. And I remember as a young boy just I did not like Jimmy Carter. And I'll tell you why. It's not because of my politics as a 5-year-old. It was because I was a huge fan of the Oakland Raiders at the time. And Monday Night Football was coming up that night, and the Raiders were playing, and I had looked forward to this Monday Night Football game all week long, and I got sat down to watch it, and the game just gets started, and they break into the game for breaking news, and it's like a 2-hour speech by Jimmy Carter, ruining the game. I have hated that guy ever since. I don't even like the dude. Don't like the dude because of that. Not because of his politics. Hey, whatever, I'm not here to preach politics. But that bitch interrupted my Raiders game, and it pissed me off. He plays a cameo in this, and as soon as he showed up, I was like, oh, I remember. Not carnivorous virus, coronavirus. Sorry. Coughed in the middle of that. I'm not spreading that. This is in the middle of the first week of coronavirus, and the panic is high. If you're watching this in the future, this is when I'm filming this, is like right in the middle of coronavirus fever. And my cough, I don't have it. Well, don't know. We'll see. Another thing about Jimmy Carter, I didn't like the guy. So I remember in Alaska, I grew up in Alaska. Me and my friends were out by the church throwing blocks of ice at cars as they passed by on the highway, and we were hitting them, and we were causing havoc. And the police came, and my friends ran off. I didn't know they ran off, so I was there by myself answering the questions of the police. And he's like, "What's your name?" And I figured, hey, this is the worst trouble I've ever been in. Who could I name? Well, I immediately thought of the evil Jimmy Carter because he interrupted the Raiders game. And so I said, well, my name's Jimmy Carter. And he's like, really? Your name's Jimmy Carter? And he's like, well, where are your parents, Jimmy Carter? And I said, hey, I ain't got no parents. I ain't got no parents. He's like, you don't have any parents. I was like, yeah. He's like, well, Jimmy Carter, I'm gonna have to take you into prison for throwing ice at the cars. And I was like, I ain't throwing no ice at the cars. He's like, yeah, we got reports that you were throwing ice at the cars. And I said, hey man, I'm a good religious boy, man. My dad, he works right there in that church behind us. And the cop says, hey, I thought you said you didn't have no parents. And what did I do? I knew the jig was up. I just turned. I ran as fast as I could. I got away. I ran around the block several times and went home. That has nothing to do with The Shining. I'm sorry. Let me tell you my review of this. Let me tell you my review of The Shining. I give this a fresh, brand new, sparkly read of 7 stars out of 10. I rate 1 out of 10 stars. This one gets 7. I enjoyed rereading it a lot. I don't think it's one of his best, but it's worth a 7. It was fresh to me. I hadn't read it in so long that every word of it was brand new. I enjoyed myself. 7 out of 10. And like I say, I end every video by letting you know every book I read or every book I write, Forgetting Moon, Blackest Heart, Lonesome Crown, all of the books I've ever written are dedicated to Stephen King, Motley Crue, and the Oakland Raiders. Because when I was a kid, those were the 3 most important things to me in my life. And that's why every book I write is dedicated to those 3 things. So everybody go out and get a copy of The Dead Zone, because I think it is a nice piece of literary fiction and maybe one of Stephen King's first pieces of literary fiction that was pretty damn good.